My name is Rowan, I'm 24 years old, and my own sister is pregnant with my ex-fiancé's baby, the man I was supposed to marry. Before I tell you about the moment I crashed their engagement party and ruined everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all came to a head last Saturday night. My parents' house, the one with the pristine white siding and the perfectly manicured lawn in our quiet little corner of Ohio, was glowing. Fairy lights were twinkling in the manicured hedges. You could hear the polite laughter and the clink of champagne glasses from the street. It was a picture of perfect, small-town happiness. A perfect, beautiful lie. The half-empty bottle of whiskey felt heavy in my coat pocket, a cold weight against my hip. My hand was shaking so hard I had to grip the car door handle just to steady myself. For a second, I thought about just driving away. Driving until Ohio was a memory in my rearview mirror. But the image of my sister's smug smile, the memory of my mother's dismissive voice on the phone, no. I couldn't run. Not tonight. I didn't knock. I just turned the gold-plated handle and walked in. The laughter died. It was like sucking all the air out of a room. 50 pairs of eyes, friends I'd grown up with, neighbors who used to give me cookies, family who were supposed to love me, all turned to me. I probably looked like a ghost. My hair was a mess, my eyes were red-rimmed, and I know I smelled like cheap whiskey and heartbreak. My mother was the first to move. She glided across the hardwood floor, her face a perfect mask of polite concern that didn't quite hide the fury in her eyes. "Rowan," she hissed, her voice low and sharp. "What on earth are you doing here? You're making a scene." A scene. That's all this was to her. My entire world had been bulldozed, my future stolen from me by the two people I should have been able to trust the most, and she was worried about a scene. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. I could feel the gazes of everyone in that room, judging me, whispering. They were all in on it. They all knew. They had watched my sister steal my life and they were here, toasting to it with expensive champagne. They were celebrating my replacement. "I need to talk to her," I said, my voice hoarse. It didn't sound like my own. "This is not the time or the place," my mother snapped, trying to steer me toward the door. "We can discuss your issues tomorrow. After you've sobered up." But I wasn't looking at my mother anymore. I looked past her, my eyes landing on the happy couple, standing by the fireplace like a king and queen. On my sister, Genevieve, radiant in a white dress, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. And on Holden, the man who had held me while I cried, the man who had promised me forever, the man whose child was now growing inside my sister. His face went pale, the color draining from it like water down a sink. He knew. She knew. They all knew what they had done. And they thought they were going to get away with it. They thought I would just quietly disappear, leaving them to build their happy little family on the wreckage of my own. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the smell of whiskey and grief filling my lungs. I pulled myself up to my full height, ignoring my mother's hand on my arm. Every ounce of pain, every sleepless night, every tear I had cried over the last year coalesced into a single, hard point of light inside my chest. And I opened my mouth to speak. Before the silence and the whiskey and the rage, there was us. It seems like a different lifetime now, a story about two other people. But it was me. It was Rowan, 17 years old, with eyes only for Holden. He was the star quarterback, of course, a cliché ripped straight from a movie script, all broad shoulders and an easy smile that could make the whole world feel right. I wasn't a cheerleader, I was the quiet girl who worked at the town library, the one who always had a book in her hand. He used to come in, pretending to look for something for our class, but his eyes would always find mine over the tops of the shelves. Our first date was at Miller's Diner, a place with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that only seemed to play songs from our parents' generation. We shared a chocolate milkshake with 2 straws, and he told me about his dream of being an architect, of building houses. I told him about my dream of being a writer, of building worlds with words. It felt easy. It felt like coming home. Those high school years melted into a golden haze of Friday night lights, of stolen kisses in his beat-up Ford truck by the old reservoir, of holding hands at the county fair. Everyone knew we were a package deal. Rowan and Holden. It was never one without the other. Our town was the kind of place where you either get out or you settle down, and we both knew which one we wanted. We didn't need the big city. We just needed each other. He proposed the summer I turned 20. We were back at the reservoir, the same spot where we'd had our first real conversation. There was no fancy dinner, no hidden photographer. He just took my hands, his own calloused and warm, and looked at me with an earnestness that buckled my knees. He pulled out a small, velvet box. The ring wasn't huge. It was a simple, delicate diamond on a white gold band, something he'd saved up for by working construction with his dad every summer. It was perfect. "I know what I want, Rowan," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "And it's all right here. It's you." Of course, I said yes. We were married in our hearts long before then. Our parents were thrilled. My mother immediately started planning a wedding that was far grander than anything I wanted, but I let her. Genevieve, my sister, was named my maid of honor. She seemed happy for me, throwing me a small party, helping me look at dresses. At the time, I saw her excitement as genuine. Looking back, there was always something tight around her eyes when Holden would wrap his arms around me, a flicker of something I couldn't name. I told myself it was just sisterly jealousy, that she wished she had what we had. I was so naive. We moved into a small, two-bedroom apartment above the old hardware store on Main Street. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We spent weekends painting the walls a soft yellow and hunting for furniture at thrift stores. We'd lie on the floor, making plans. A house with a big yard for a dog, a golden retriever we'd name Sam. 2 kids, a boy and a girl. He'd have his father's eyes, she'd have my smile. He'd build the house himself. I'd write my novels in a sun-filled office. We had it all mapped out. He got a promotion at the construction firm, his salary was steady, and I was working part-time at the local newspaper. Life was simple and it was good. And then, one crisp autumn morning, the world became magical. 2 pink lines on a plastic stick. I remember my hands shaking as I held it. It was too soon, we weren't married yet, we were still just kids ourselves in so many ways, but none of that mattered. A wave of pure, unfiltered joy washed over me, so powerful it felt like it could light up the entire town. I wrapped the test in tissue paper, put it in a little box, and gave it to Holden when he came home from work, his face tired and smudged with dirt. He opened it, confused at first. Then his eyes widened. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a look of such profound wonder and love that it still takes my breath away to remember it. He dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around my waist, pressing his face to my still flat stomach. "Hi in there," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's your dad." That night, we didn't talk about mortgages or the cost of diapers. We talked about names. We lay in the dark, whispering our dreams into the space between us. We were going to be a family. Everything we had ever wanted was right there, in that little apartment, real and tangible and starting to grow right inside of me. We were invincible. We were standing on top of the world, with a future so bright and certain it felt like we could reach out and touch it. We had no idea we were standing on the edge of a cliff. Happiness that pure is a fragile thing. You don't know it at the time. You think it's made of steel, but it's really made of glass. And our glass was about to shatter. I was about 3 months along. The morning sickness had finally started to fade, replaced by a gentle hum of energy. I was starting to show, just a tiny curve that I would stand in front of the mirror and cradle with my hands for hours. Holden had already bought a ridiculous little baseball glove and set it on the dresser. Everything was real. It started on a Tuesday. A dull cramp in my lower back. I told myself it was just growing pains, a normal part of the process. But then, later that afternoon, I saw the spot of blood. It was small, but it was bright red against the white tissue, a splash of color that screamed danger. My blood ran cold. I called Holden, my voice a strangled whisper. He left work immediately. The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic lights and street signs that all seemed to be mocking me, advertising a happy, normal world that I was no longer a part of. The silence in the car was suffocating. Holden held my hand, his knuckles white, but we didn't speak. What was there to say? We were suspended in a terrible, silent prayer. The emergency room was a special kind of hell. The antiseptic smell, the detached look on the nurses' faces, the agonizing wait while other people's lives fell apart around you. When they finally called my name, I felt a tremor of fear so profound I could barely walk. They put me in a cold, sterile room and a young doctor with tired eyes came in to perform the ultrasound. I'll never forget the sound of that machine. The static-filled silence. With a healthy pregnancy, you hear a heartbeat, a fast, rhythmic thump-thump-thump that is the most beautiful sound in the world. But all we heard was static. The doctor moved the wand around, his mouth set in a thin, grim line. I watched his face, not the screen. I knew. I knew before he even spoke. Holden was still holding my hand, whispering, "It's okay, it's going to be okay." He was trying to convince himself as much as me. Finally, the doctor turned off the machine, plunging the room into that terrible silence. He pulled up a stool. "I'm so sorry," he said, and the 3 words I'd been dreading hit me with the force of a physical blow. "There's no heartbeat." It felt like a punch to the gut. The air left my body. I remember a sound, a keening, animal wail, and it took me a moment to realize it was coming from me. Holden just crumpled, his head in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The glass hadn't just shattered. It had been ground into dust. Coming home was the worst part. Walking back into that little apartment, which just that morning had been a sanctuary of hope, was torture. The tiny baseball glove on the dresser felt like an accusation. The books on baby names sat on the coffee table like relics from a forgotten civilization. The life we had been so excited for had been erased. It had never even had a chance to begin. The grief was a poison. It seeped into everything. I quit my job. Most days, I couldn't find a reason to get out of bed. The yellow walls of our apartment felt like they were closing in on me. Holden tried, at first. He'd bring me food I wouldn't eat, try to coax me out for walks I wouldn't take. But he was grieving too, in his own silent, masculine way. He started working longer hours, staying out late. The apartment got quieter and quieter. The quiet was where the blame grew. It was a toxic weed in the dark. He never said it out loud, but I saw it in his eyes. A flicker of resentment. Had I done something wrong? Lifted something too heavy? Worried too much? I started to hate my own body for betraying me, for betraying us. The fights started soon after. They were ugly, desperate things, born of pain. "You don't know what it's like," I screamed at him one night, my voice raw from crying. To lose something that was growing inside of you. To feel your own body fail. "And you think this is easy for me, Rowan?" he shot back, his face haggard. "That was my child, too. Or did you forget that? All you do is lie there. You won't talk to me, you won't let me in. It's like you're trying to punish me." He was right. I was punishing him, punishing myself, punishing the world. We were 2 people drowning, and instead of holding on to each other, we were pulling each other under. The conversation about separating happened about 6 months after the miscarriage. It was calm, exhausted. There were no more tears left to cry. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I look at you, and all I see is what we lost. And I see you look at me the same way. Maybe we need some space, I said, the words tasting like ash. Just for a little while. To figure out how to breathe again. We were promising each other it was temporary. A break, not a breakup. A chance to heal so we could come back together stronger. But as we packed his bags in silence, the quiet in our little apartment was louder than any fight we'd ever had. And as he walked out the door, a part of me knew he wasn't coming back, not really. If you're still listening, could you do me a favor? Please like this video and comment with the number 1 below. It lets me know you've given me a like, and it tells me you're here with me on this journey. Your support is a bigger encouragement than you can imagine. Just comment the number 1, and then let me tell you the rest of my story. That first year apart was a long, gray blur. Holden moved back in with his parents. I stayed in our little yellow apartment, which now felt more like a tomb. The silence was deafening. For the first few weeks, I just existed. I ate when I remembered to, slept when my body finally gave out from exhaustion. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of that apartment. It was my dad who finally intervened. He showed up one day, took one look at me and the state of the apartment, and made a phone call. The next day, I had my first appointment with a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Miller. I didn't want to go. I wanted to wallow. I wanted the world to leave me alone in my grief. But I went, mostly just to get my dad to stop looking at me with such pity in his eyes. Therapy was hard. It was like breaking a bone so it could be set properly. Dr. Miller made me talk about the baby. She made me say his name, we had decided on Caleb, out loud. She made me confront the ugly feelings, the anger at my body, the misplaced resentment towards Holden, the deep, dark well of shame. It was grueling, painful work. I cried through most of the sessions for the first 6 months. But slowly, session by session, I started to feel the weight on my chest lighten, just a little. I started to learn that the grief wasn't something to get over, but something to carry. It would always be a part of me, but it didn't have to be the whole of me. During this time, Genevieve was attentive. Almost strangely so. My older sister had always been a bit flighty, more concerned with her social life than with family matters. But after the miscarriage and the separation, she was suddenly my shadow. She'd show up at my apartment with casseroles and gossip magazines. She'd sit with me on the couch while I stared at the wall, filling the silence with stories about her job or the latest drama with her friends. I thought she was just trying to be a good sister. I was grateful for the company, even if her chatter sometimes felt gratingly cheerful. But looking back, there were signs. Little things. Like the way she would subtly steer the conversation back to Holden. "Have you heard from him?" she'd ask, a little too eagerly. "You know, men just don't know how to handle these things. He probably just needs time." And then there was the comment. We were sitting on my little balcony one afternoon, watching the sun set. I was having a particularly bad day, feeling that familiar wave of emptiness wash over me. I confessed to her that I felt broken, like I had failed at the one thing a woman is supposed to be able to do. She patted my hand, her expression one of deep sympathy. "Oh, honey, don't say that," she said, her voice soft. "You're so young. You have plenty of time. Maybe some people just aren't meant to be mothers so early." At the time, I barely registered it. It felt clumsy, maybe a little insensitive, but I chalked it up to Genevieve just not knowing what to say. I thought she was trying to make me feel better, trying to tell me it wasn't my fault. Now, I hear those words for what they were, a twisted justification. A seed of her own narrative being planted in the barren soil of my grief. She wasn't comforting me. She was absolving herself. About 10 months into our separation, Holden called. The sound of his voice was both a comfort and a pain. It was awkward at first. We made small talk. He asked about my job. I'd finally started freelancing for the local paper again. I asked about his. He told me he'd been thinking about me a lot. He said he missed me. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, gave a painful lurch. We decided to meet for coffee. It was tense, but the old connection was still there, a faint current under the surface of all our pain. He looked older, more tired. He told me he had been a mess, that he'd handled everything wrong. He admitted he'd blamed me when he should have been supporting me. He apologized. It was everything I had needed to hear for a year. We started seeing each other again. Slowly. Cautiously. It wasn't like it was before. The bright, shiny certainty was gone, replaced by something more fragile and deliberate. But there was hope. We talked for hours, really talked, for the first time since the miscarriage. We laid all our cards on the table. We promised to do better. A few weeks after my 23rd birthday, he asked me to move back in with him. Not to the old apartment that held too many ghosts. He'd gotten a new place, a small rental house on the other side of town. A fresh start. I said yes. I packed up my things, leaving the yellow walls and the sad memories behind. I let myself believe that we had weathered the worst storm of our lives and had come out the other side. I believed we were stronger for it. I was so excited to tell Genevieve, to share the good news that we were finally putting our lives back together. She gave me a huge hug, her smile bright. "I am so happy for you," she'd said. "You too deserve this." I believed her. I really, truly believed her. I was stepping back into my life, full of a tentative, fragile hope. I had no idea I was walking straight into the heart of an even bigger lie. The fresh start wasn't so fresh. Living with Holden again felt off. The easy intimacy we once shared was gone. He was physically present, but emotionally, he was a million miles away. He was guarded, quiet. He'd flinch sometimes when I touched him, a barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders, but I felt it like a static shock. He spent hours on his phone, his face illuminated by the screen, a small, secretive smile sometimes playing on his lips. When I'd ask who he was talking to, he'd just shrug. No one. Just work stuff. My anxiety, which had quieted to a dull hum during therapy, roared back to life. My mind started racing, filling in the blanks. Was he seeing someone else? Had he met someone during our year apart and not told me? The thought was a cold, sick knot in my stomach. I tried to talk to him about it. "Holden, is everything okay?" I asked one night as he stared blankly at the television. "You seem distant." He blinked, as if waking from a dream. "What?" "No, I'm fine. Just tired. Long day." But it wasn't just a long day. It was every day. I felt like a ghost in my own home, haunting the edges of a life he was living without me. My hard-won healing started to unravel. I was second-guessing everything, overthinking every glance, every short reply. I was slipping back into that dark, obsessive place I had fought so hard to escape. I was becoming a person I didn't recognize, someone I didn't want to be. I was paranoid, insecure, and constantly on edge. The breaking point came on a Thursday. I had made his favorite dinner, pot roast, the way his mom used to make it. I thought maybe a taste of the familiar, of the way things used to be, could bridge the chasm that had opened between us. He came home late, barely glancing at the food. He muttered something about eating at the office, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and went to the bedroom to shower. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the perfectly cooked meal getting cold on the counter. A wave of humiliation and anger washed over me. This wasn't working. I wasn't crazy. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. His phone was on the nightstand, face down. It buzzed. I'd never, ever gone through his phone. Not in all our years together. It was a line I never thought I would cross. It felt like a violation, a surrender to the worst parts of myself. But in that moment, I knew. I knew that if I didn't find out what was going on, the not knowing would eat me alive. My sanity felt like it was hanging by a thread, and that phone held the scissors. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking. I picked it up. His passcode was our old anniversary. My fingers trembled as I typed it in. It opened. The screen lit up with his text messages. The top conversation was with a contact saved only as Jen. My breath hitched. General, my sister's nickname. No, it couldn't be. It had to be someone else. A coworker. A friend. Anyone but her. I opened the thread. My world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just a few texts. It was a novel. A year's worth of conversations. It started innocently enough, just after our separation. Hey, just checking in. How are you holding up, from her. It's rough, from him. But the tone shifted quickly. The check-ins became daily. The talk about me and my grief slowly morphed into talk about them. Flirting. Inside jokes. Compliments. You looked beautiful today, he'd written a few months ago. You didn't look so bad yourself, she'd replied, with a winking emoji. My stomach churned. I kept scrolling, my thumb moving robotically. I saw their plans to meet up for coffee, for dinner, just to talk. I saw the late-night texts, the ones that were anything but innocent. I can't stop thinking about you. You shouldn't. Come over. It was all there. The entire sordid timeline of their affair. It had been happening the whole time. While she was bringing me casseroles and patting my hand, she was sleeping with my fiancé. While he was telling me he needed space to heal, he was healing in my sister's bed. The betrayal was so immense, so complete, it was almost incomprehensible. It felt like a scene from a twisted movie, not my actual life. I scrolled back to the most recent messages, from just today. My blood ran cold. There was a picture. It was a grainy, black and white image. An ultrasound. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a sob. I felt the pot roast I hadn't eaten rising in my throat. I couldn't breathe. Underneath the picture was a message from her, sent just an hour ago. Our little secret. Can't wait for our happy ending. Love. Our happy ending. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. I collapsed, my back sliding down the wall until I was huddled in a ball. The sound of the shower was still running in the bathroom. He was in there, washing away the grime of the day, while I was sitting out here, covered in the filth of their lies. It wasn't just him. It was her. My own sister. And my parents, they had to have known. Our friends. This secret was too big to keep between just two people in a town this small. They had all been watching me, pitying me, lying to my face. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was utterly, completely alone. For a full day, I was a ghost. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I moved through the house in a fog of numb disbelief. Holden seemed to notice my catatonic state but attributed it to one of my down days. He'd pat my shoulder awkwardly and say, "You'll feel better tomorrow," before retreating to the safety of his phone. He had no idea I knew. I let him believe it. Confronting him felt pointless. He wasn't the architect of this betrayal. He was just a willing accomplice. The true mastermind, the one who had twisted the knife, was my sister. I needed to look her in the eye. I needed to see her face when she was forced to drop the mask. I texted her from the burner phone I bought at a gas station. I couldn't bear to use my own. Meet me at the daily grind. 2:00. We need to talk. I didn't sign my name. She would know. She arrived 5 minutes late, looking flawless as always. Her hair was perfect, her makeup immaculate. She was wearing a stylish new coat that she left unbuttoned, and I couldn't help but notice the slight, unmistakable swell of her stomach. She slid into the booth opposite me, a look of mild annoyance on her face. "Rowan, this is a little dramatic, don't you think?" she said, sighing as she placed her designer purse on the seat. "What's so urgent?" I didn't say a word. I just slid Holden's phone across the table. I had taken it from the house that morning. I had it open to the picture of the ultrasound. To her message. Our happy ending. Her eyes flickered down to the screen. For a split second, I saw it. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of cool composure. She pushed the phone back toward me. "You went through his things," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. "I'm surprised at you, Rowan." "Don't," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Don't you dare try to turn this on me." "How could you, Jen? You're my sister." She took a slow sip of the latte she'd ordered. "Things are complicated," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Complicated?" My voice rose, and a few people at nearby tables glanced over. "You were sleeping with my fiancé while I was grieving the loss of his baby. You got pregnant by him. There is nothing complicated about that. It's monstrous." That's when she finally looked at me. And there was no shame in her eyes. No remorse. There was just pity. A cold, condescending pity that made my skin crawl. "Let's be honest with ourselves, Rowan," she began, her voice low and reasonable, the kind of voice you use with a hysterical child. "Your relationship with Holden was over long before I ever got involved. The miscarriage broke you both. You know it did. We were grieving." I hissed. "We were supposed to be healing." "He was," she said calmly. "And you weren't. You pushed him away. You locked yourself in that apartment and wallowed. He was drowning, and you were the anchor tied to his feet. He came to me for comfort, as a friend. He needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't a walking rain cloud of misery. I was there for him when his own fiancé wasn't." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, dipped in the poison of half-truths. She was taking my deepest pain, my depression, my grief, and twisting it into a weapon to use against me. She was making it my fault. "You call this being there for him?" I gestured at her stomach. "This is a betrayal of the highest order. Mom and Dad know, don't they? That's why they've been so weird." She had the audacity to look hurt. "They were in a difficult position. They didn't want to cause you any more pain. We all agreed it was best to wait for the right time to tell you, once you were more stable." More stable. The words hung in the air between us. They were painting me as the unhinged, unstable little sister who couldn't handle the truth. They had created a narrative where they were the victims of circumstance, and I was the problem to be managed. "So you were just going to wait?" I asked, my voice flat. "Until what? The wedding? Was I supposed to find out when you walked down the aisle with a baby bump? Were you planning on making me a godmother?" And then she delivered the final, devastating blow. She leaned forward, her expression softening into one of twisted sincerity. "Look, I know this is hard to hear. But maybe this is for the best. He's happy, Rowan. Genuinely happy, for the first time in a long time. And I'm happy. We're starting a family." "Honestly," she said, reaching across the table as if to touch my hand, "you should be thanking me for keeping him in the family." That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The last, fragile thread of love I held for the sister I grew up with just broke. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I looked down at her perfectly made-up face, her faint concern, her stomach that held the baby that should have been mine. And I felt nothing. No sadness. No heartbreak. Just a cold, hard, clarifying rage. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her sitting there with her latte and her lies. She had given me a gift, in a way. She had shown me exactly who she was. And I knew exactly what I had to do. The next few weeks were a blur of cold fury. The official engagement announcement appeared in the local paper. Genevieve Miller and Holden Maxwell are pleased to announce their engagement. There was a smiling photo of them, looking for all the world like the perfect couple. Then, the invitation arrived in the mail. Thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering. An engagement party at my parents' house. It was a slap in the face. A declaration of their victory. They weren't just content to have stolen my life, they wanted me to watch them celebrate it. That was the day I started drinking. I let the anger and the whiskey simmer together until Saturday night. I put on a black dress, morning attire, I thought, and drove to the house I grew up in. I didn't have a plan, not really. I just knew I couldn't let them have this. I couldn't let them build their perfect new life on top of my buried one without a single word of protest. I walked in, and the scene from my nightmares played out exactly as I'd imagined. The laughter, the champagne, my mother's brittle smile. Her attempt to hustle me out the door. And then, my eyes locking with theirs. Genevieve and Holden. The moment stretched, thin and tight, and I felt the collective breath of the room being held. I opened my mouth. A scene? I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. I laughed, a short, ugly sound. Oh, Mom, we're way past a scene. This is more like the final act of a tragedy. I pushed past her, walking into the center of the living room. I felt like I was on a stage. I just want to say a few words, I announced to the room of frozen faces. A toast to the happy couple. I raised an imaginary glass. To my big sister, Genevieve. She's always been so good at getting what she wants. When we were kids, it was my dolls. As we got older, it was my clothes, my friends. I guess it was only a matter of time before she moved on to my fiancé. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the room. My father started toward me, his face turning a blotchy red. Rowan, that's enough. Oh, I'm just getting started, Dad, I said, not taking my eyes off Genevieve, whose face had gone chalk white. See, the thing about Genevieve is that she is a world-class supporter. When I was at my lowest, after my miscarriage, I let the word hang in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. She was right there. Bringing me food. Holding my hand. And all the while, she was sleeping with Holden. My Holden. The grieving father of the baby I had just lost. The gasps were audible now. People were looking at each other, then at Genevieve and Holden. The perfect party was crumbling. And to Holden, I continued, turning my attention to him. He looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. A man of such deep feeling and loyalty. He needed space to heal, he told me. And I, like a fool, gave it to him. I didn't realize that healing meant moving into my sister's bed. But I guess he found comfort there. A lot of comfort, it seems. I paused, letting the implication sink in before delivering the final blow. I looked directly at Genevieve, at the hand she had protectively placed over her stomach. Because they haven't just been sharing a bed. They've been sharing everything. They're starting a family. That's right, everyone, I said, my voice ringing with bitter triumph. My sister is pregnant. With my ex-fiancé's baby. Isn't that wonderful news? A real happy ending. The silence in the room was absolute. It was broken by a single, choked sob from Genevieve. She was trying to play the victim, her face crumpling as she looked at Holden for support. My mother rushed to her side. Look what you've done, you cruel girl, she shrieked at me. What I've done? I shot back, my voice rising with a year's worth of suppressed rage. What have I done? I grieved. I went to therapy. I tried to put my life back together. While all of you, I yelled, sweeping my gaze across the room at my parents, at our so-called friends, were lying to my face. You stood by and watched this happen. You let her do this to me. You went to brunch with her, you helped her plan this party, and you said nothing. It was for the best, Rowan, my father said, his voice weak. We were trying to protect you. Protect me? I laughed again, the sound cracking. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting her. You always have. You were just hoping I would be the good, quiet, broken little girl and not make a fuss. But you underestimated how much I had to lose. Because I've already lost everything. That's when Genevieve finally snapped. The tears vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her face was twisted and ugly. She pushed away from my mother and took a step toward me. You think you've lost everything? She screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. You lost nothing because you had nothing. He never would have been happy with you. You were a black hole of sadness. You suffocate everything you touch. Holden tried to grab her arm. Jen, don't. But she ripped her arm away, her eyes locked on mine. And then she said it. The words that would sever the final bond between us forever. The words that exposed the rotten core of her soul for everyone to see. You want to know the truth? She shrieked, her voice echoing in the dead silent room. Maybe your baby died for a reason. So I could get my happy ending. The air turned to ice. Every person in that room heard it. The cruelty was so profound, so absolute, it was breathtaking. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared, horrified. Even Holden looked at her as if he'd never seen her before. The rage inside me vanished, replaced by a sudden, calm clarity. I looked at my sister's hate-filled face, and I felt nothing but a distant, cold pity. She had just handed me my freedom. She had shown everyone exactly who she was. I gave a small, slow nod. I looked around the room, at the wreckage of their perfect party. At the shocked faces. At the truth, finally laid bare. Good, I said, my voice quiet but clear. And then I turned around and walked out the door, leaving them all behind in the deafening silence. The drive home was eerily calm. The whiskey had worn off, leaving behind a pounding headache but a mind that was, for the first time in a year, completely clear. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove. The adrenaline from the confrontation faded, and what was left wasn't grief or rage, but a profound, hollow emptiness. I had detonated my life, and now I was standing in the fallout. My phone started blowing up before I even got back to the rental house. Voicemails from my father, filled with blustering anger. Dozens of texts from my mother, oscillating between calling me a monster and begging me to think about the family. Texts from old friends, some offering tentative support, others accusing me of being cruel. I turned the phone off and threw it on the passenger seat. The next few days were silent. I unplugged from the world. I sat in the quiet house that Holden and I had shared, but which now felt like a stranger's home. The silence was a comfort. It was clean. There were no more lies to navigate, no more whispers to decipher. There was only the truth, ugly and liberating. On the third day, a number I didn't recognize buzzed on my phone, which I had foolishly turned back on. I almost ignored it, but some instinct told me to answer. Hello? Rowan. It was Genevieve. Her voice wasn't hysterical or angry like it had been at the party. It was cold, flat, and filled with an astonishing level of entitlement. What do you want, Genevieve? I asked, my own voice just as cold. I'm calling about the ring, she said, as if she were calling about a borrowed sweater. Holden wants it back. He's going to use it to get a new one designed for me. It's disrespectful for you to keep it, considering the circumstances. I almost laughed. Disrespectful. She was talking to me about disrespect. After everything she had done, after the monstrous thing she had said, her primary concern was the diamond ring on my finger. The audacity was breathtaking. "You're worried about a ring," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It's a family heirloom," she snapped, a hint of her party night venom creeping back in. "It belonged to his grandmother. It's meant for the woman who is going to be the mother of his children. That's me now, not you. So put it in a box and drop it off at Mom and Dad's." Something inside me, something I thought was broken beyond repair, clicked into place. All the pain and humiliation of the past year suddenly coalesced into a single point of steely resolve. She wasn't just trying to take my future anymore, she was trying to erase my past, to claim every piece of the life that had once been mine. The ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of the promises he had made to me, of the life we were supposed to build, of the baby we were supposed to have. The value of that ring could have been a start on a college fund for our child. And she thought she could just have it. "No," I said. The word was simple, but it felt like the most powerful thing I had ever said. "What did you say?" she sputtered, taken aback. I said no. "You're not getting the ring." "You can't do that," she shrieked. "It's not yours. We'll get a lawyer, we'll sue you for it." I finally did laugh then, a real laugh, though it was hollow and without humor. "You do that, General, you get a lawyer. Imagine the discovery process for that lawsuit. Imagine telling a judge the whole story, including what you said about my baby. See how that goes for you." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "This ring," I continued, my voice calm and steady, the voice of someone who had finally realized her own power, "is the only thing I have left from the life you and Holden blew up. It's my inheritance from a future that died. So here's what's going to happen. I am going to take this ring to a jeweler tomorrow, and I'm going to sell it. Every last penny is going to go towards paying for the therapy that you and Holden have put me in. It will pay for me to clean up the mess you made of my head and my heart." I let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final line. "Consider it your wedding gift." And then I hung up. I blocked her number. Then I blocked my mother's. Then my father's. One by one, I erased them from my life. I looked down at the diamond on my finger, sparkling under the lamplight. It no longer represented a broken promise. It represented my escape. A few months have passed since what my therapist now refers to as the detonation. I sold the ring. I got more for it than I expected. And just like I promised, the money went straight into a separate account I labeled Rebuilding Fund. It paid for my therapy sessions, the deposit on a new apartment in a city an hour away, and a few pieces of new furniture that had no memories attached to them. Leaving my hometown was the hardest and easiest thing I've ever done. I packed my life into a small U-Haul, leaving behind the ghosts on Main Street and the whispers at the grocery store. The loneliness of a new city was daunting at first. There were days when the silence in my small, clean apartment felt like a physical weight. But it was a different kind of silence than the one I had lived in with Holden. This silence was my own. It was peaceful. It was free. I don't speak to my family. After I hung up on Genevieve, my parents tried to orchestrate what they called a family healing session. It was just another attempt to manage me, to smooth things over so their perfect family picture wouldn't have a gaping hole in it. I refused. Healing, I told my father in our last ever phone call, doesn't involve sitting in a room with your abusers. He didn't understand. I don't think he ever will. Cutting them off felt like amputating a limb, but I know now it was necessary to stop the poison from spreading. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Genevieve and Holden got married at the courthouse. Quietly. I guess a big wedding was out of the question after their engagement party became the stuff of local legend. I also heard she had a baby boy. I try not to think about him. It's not the baby's fault. I hope, for his sake, that he is loved and that the toxicity that created him doesn't seep into his life. I'm working full-time now at a regional magazine. I even got a small promotion last month. The work is challenging, and it forces me to engage with the world, to think about things other than my own past. I'm slowly making friends. Tentative, cautious friendships, but they're real. The grief is still there, of course. It's not a raw, open wound anymore. It's a scar. It's a part of my landscape now. There are days when I see a young couple pushing a stroller and I feel a familiar, painful ache in my chest. But it doesn't consume me anymore. Dr. Miller says that grief is just love with nowhere to go. So I'm learning to pour that love back into myself. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone enough to fall in love again. The idea of being that vulnerable with another person is terrifying. But for the first time, my future isn't defined by a relationship with a man. It's not defined by the dream of being a wife or a mother. It's just mine. An unwritten page. I don't know what my future looks like anymore, and for the first time in my life, that feels less like a terror and more like a promise. I survived. I'm healing. And I'm finally free. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the end. It means more than you know to finally share it. I have a question for all of you watching. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to cut ties with family in order to save yourself? Let me know your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more.